The sound that broke Cressida Bishop's life wasn't a scream, but the delicate shatter of a champagne flute on marble. It was her husband's gala, a celebration of his fashion empire, and she stood frozen 5 months pregnant, watching him kiss another woman under the glare of a crystal chandelier. The woman was his new star designer, but it wasn't the kiss that shattered her. It was his words when he finally saw her. He didn't look guilty, just annoyed. "Darling." He sighed a whisper of pure venom. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just business. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby." Her world didn't just crack. It atomized. That was the night she walked out with nothing but a broken heart and a life growing inside her, completely unaware that the key to his entire kingdom was already in her hands. Life in the Montclair penthouse was an exercise in curated perfection, from the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline like a living masterpiece to the stark white orchids that were replaced every 3 days. Everything was designed to be beautiful, flawless and untouchable. Cressida, or Cress as she preferred, often felt like just another one of those exquisite, fragile objects. Her husband, Lucius Montclair, was the architect of this world. He was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Montclair Couture, an empire built on the dazzling, cutthroat world of high fashion. To the public, he was a visionary. To his board, a titan. To Cress, he was the man who had swept her off her feet, a whirlwind of ambition and charm, who saw her a young, promising textile designer and decided she would be his. Their meeting had been a fairy tale. She was interning at a small artisanal fabric mill when he'd come scouting for new materials. He was captivated not by her designs, which he called charming but provincial, but by her quiet grace and the way she seemed to complement his own dazzling persona. He pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to a corporate acquisition. Within 6 months, they were married. Cress, swept away by the grandeur and the intensity of his affection, believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She soon learned, however, that being Mrs. Montclair meant her own ambitions were expected to be packed away like last season's collection. Her design sketchbook, once filled with vibrant, innovative patterns, gathered dust on a shelf in her cavernous walk-in closet. When she tried to show him her work, he would pat her hand indulgently. "That's lovely, my dear," he'd say, his eyes already on his phone. "But you have a much more important role now. You're the face of my home, the hostess of my parties. Leave the hard work to me." The penthouse, for all its beauty, became her gilded cage. Her days were a structured sequence of appointments, with event planners, nutritionists, and personal trainers, all meticulously scheduled by Lucius's assistant. Her friends were Lucius's friends, wives of bankers and executives, who spoke of charity galas and summering in the Hamptons, their conversations as sterile and polished as the marble floors beneath their feet. Cress felt a part of herself, the creative, passionate part, slowly suffocating. The news of her pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion, a fresh start. When she told Lucius, placing the positive test on his polished mahogany desk, he looked up from a quarterly report, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He simply nodded slowly. "Good," he said, as if she had just successfully closed a deal. "A son, I hope. An heir is good for the brand's image. Legacy." His reaction was a cold splash of water, but Cress tried to rationalize it. He was a busy man, always thinking about the business. She threw herself into the pregnancy. hoping the shared experience of creating a life would bridge the growing chasm between them. She started sketching again this time, designs for baby clothes using soft organic fabrics. She imagined a small independent line, something of her own. One evening, brimming with a rare surge of confidence, she laid out her sketches and business proposal on the dining room table before he got home. She had worked on it for weeks, researching suppliers, costing out materials, and even creating a brand name, Bishop's Weave, a nod to her family name and her grandfather who had been a tailor. Lucius walked in, loosening his tie, his face tight with the stress of the day. He glanced at the papers scattered across the table, and his lip curled into a faint sneer. "What's all this? It's my idea," Cress began, her voice trembling slightly. "A luxury baby clothing line. The market is strong, and I have a unique perspective on sustainable fabrics." He picked up a sketch of a tiny, hand-stitched romper. He held it for a moment before letting it drop back onto the table. "Cressida, we've discussed this. Your hobby is charming, but it's not a business. Montclair Couture deals in power and desire, not baby clothes. It would dilute the brand." "It wouldn't be part of Montclair Couture," she insisted, her heart sinking. "It would be mine, something I built." He laughed, then a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Built, darling, you have no idea what it takes to build something. You live in a world I built for you. Your job is to be here, to be beautiful, and soon to be a mother. That should be enough for you. Now let's clear this away. We have the Future of Fashion Gala tomorrow night, and I need you to look rested." The finality in his tone was absolute. He didn't see her. He saw a function, a role to be played. The dismissal of her dream of her very identity beyond being his wife was more painful than any overt act of cruelty. As she gathered her sketches, her hands shaking, she felt the first true deep crack appear in the flawless facade of her life. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cage, and for the first time, she was rattling the bars, wondering if she had the strength to break them. The gala, meant to be a celebration of his success, now loomed like a final judgment on her own life's failures. The Future of Fashion Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, and Lucius Montclair was its undisputed king. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters weaved through the throngs with trays of shimmering champagne, and the air hummed with the electric buzz of power money and influence. Cress felt a familiar sense of detachment as she stood by Lucius's side, a practiced smile fixed on her face. She wore a deep emerald gown of Montclair silk, a dress chosen for her, designed to perfectly accommodate her 5-month baby bump, while still exuding effortless elegance. To the outside world, she was the picture of a serene, glowing mother-to-be, the perfect consort to the man of the hour. Inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. Lucius's dismissal of her business idea the night before had left a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of couture could cover. Lucius was in his element, holding court, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He accepted congratulations, his laughter booming his charisma, a tangible force field. But his eyes kept darting across the room, a flicker of something she couldn't quite place, anticipation, perhaps in their depths. Lucius, darling, a triumph as always, a gushing socialite, air-kissed them both. "We do what we can, Brenda," Lucius replied with a practiced, self-deprecating charm. "But the real future of this house is standing right over there." He gestured towards the stage, where a willowy woman with fire-red hair and a predatory smile was speaking to a cluster of fashion journalists. This was Giselle Dubois, Montclair Couture's new head designer, poached from a rival Parisian house with an astronomical salary. She was Lucius's latest, most celebrated acquisition, hailed as a design prodigy who would propel the brand into the stratosphere. Cress had met Giselle only once, a brief, chilly introduction, where the designer's eyes had swept over Cress with a look of utter disinterest, as if she were a piece of outdated furniture. Now, watching her command the room, Cress felt a prickle of unease. "I need to go speak with the press, darling," Lucius said, squeezing her arm. "Mingle. Look radiant." He left her side, and she felt instantly adrift. She made her way through the crowd, nodding and smiling, her mind a million miles away. She found a quiet alcove near a balcony, seeking a moment of respite. The cool night air was a relief. From her vantage point, she could see most of the ballroom. She saw Lucius make his way over to Giselle. He didn't join the press circle. Instead, he drew Giselle away towards a shadowed corridor behind a large floral arrangement. Cress's unease sharpened into a cold dread. She told herself she was being paranoid hormonal, but she couldn't shake the feeling. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, she slipped out of the alcove and moved towards the corridor, keeping to the edges of the room. The thumping bass of the music masked her footsteps. As she neared the floral display, she could hear their voices low and intimate. "The collection is a masterpiece, but you, my dear, are the true work of art," Lucius was saying, his voice a low purr she hadn't heard him use with her in years. "And you are the patron who knows how to display it." Giselle's throaty laugh replied, "Is your lovely little incubator enjoying the party?" The casual cruelty of the word incubator struck Cress with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs. "She plays her part," Lucius said dismissively. "She's content. As long as she has her charities and her nesting instincts, she's perfectly manageable." Cress peeked through a gap in the orchids. She saw Lucius's hand slide from Giselle's waist to cup her face. He leaned in and kissed her, not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss, filled with a passion Cress had only ever dreamed of. Time seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull roar. In that moment, Cress's world, already cracked, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the complete and utter negation of her existence. She was a part, a manageable incubator. Her love, her pregnancy, their life together, it was all a sham, a carefully managed piece of brand strategy. She stumbled back, knocking a waiter's tray. A single champagne flute teetered and then fell shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of her own heart. The sound made them both turn. Lucius's eyes widened not with guilt or remorse, but with pure, unadulterated annoyance. He strode out of the corridor, Giselle a smug shadow behind him. "Cressida," he said, his voice dangerously low, his eyes cold as ice. "What are you doing, skulking in the corners?" Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "I saw you, Lucius." He glanced at the onlookers who were beginning to stare, his face hardening into a mask of public control. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and steered her towards a side exit. "Don't you dare make a scene here," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "You will ruin everything." "You ruined everything." She finally choked out the words, raw and ragged. "Our marriage, our baby." They were in a deserted hallway now. He finally let her go, pushing her against the wall. He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and she saw nothing but contempt. "Our baby," he scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's a convenient distraction for you, isn't it?" Something to keep you busy. You should focus on your little hobby. You know the baby. The words from the opening hook. The final fatal blow. He had taken the one pure, precious thing in her life, their unborn child, and twisted it into another insult, another way to diminish her. Something inside Cress snapped. The grief, the shock, the years of quiet subservience, it all coalesced into a single clarifying moment of cold, hard certainty. She looked him dead in the eye, her tears suddenly gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "I should focus, but not on the baby, on getting as far away from you as I possibly can." Before he could react, she turned and walked away. Not back to the party, but down the hall past the kitchens and out a service exit into the cold night air. The city lights blurred as she walked a taxi's headlights, cutting through the darkness. She didn't look back. She left behind the diamonds, the silk gown, the penthouse, the lies. She walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back, a life growing inside her, and the chilling echo of her husband's final unforgivable words. The shattering was complete. Now all that was left were the ruins. The cold night air hit Cress like a slap, a brutal awakening from the suffocating warmth of the gala. The emerald silk gown felt like a costume from another life, thin and useless against the city's unforgiving chill. Her manicured hands, accustomed to the soft leather of a chauffeured car, fumbled in her tiny clutch. She had her phone, a lipstick, and a single credit card, a supplementary card on Lucius's account, which she knew would be cancelled by morning. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She was pregnant alone and effectively homeless on a downtown street corner. The towering skyscrapers that once represented a life of luxury now seemed to mock her, their glittering facades cold and indifferent. For a terrifying moment, she had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and the friends she'd cultivated over the past few years were Lucius's allies, their loyalty bought and paid for by his influence. Then a memory surfaced, a beacon in the storm. Mrs. Peterson. Martha Peterson was her landlady from college, a kind, no-nonsense widow who rented out rooms in her modest but impeccably kept brownstone in a quiet, older part of the city. Cress had kept in touch, sending a Christmas card every year, a small link to a life that was truly her own. With trembling fingers, she found the number and called. "Cressida? Dear, is that you? It's past midnight. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Peterson's voice was warm but laced with concern. A sob escaped Cress's lips, the first sound she'd made since leaving the hotel. "No," she whispered the word, cracking. "Nothing is all right. Can I come over? I have nowhere else to go." There was no hesitation. "Of course, dear. The kettle's always on. Come home." Home. The word was a balm to her shattered soul. A taxi ride across the city felt like a journey across worlds. She left the sleek, modern steel and glass of Lucius's district and entered a neighborhood of brick buildings, fire escapes and laundromats that glowed warmly in the dark. Mrs. Peterson opened the door before Cress even knocked. She was a small, sturdy woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel wool. She took one look at Cress's tear-streaked face and the ridiculously opulent gown and simply opened her arms. Cress collapsed into her embrace, the raw, unfiltered grief she'd been suppressing, finally erupting in a storm of sobs. Mrs. Peterson led her inside, sat her down at the worn oak kitchen table, and wrapped a thick knitted afghan around her shoulders. She placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in Cress's hands and sat opposite her, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. Over the next hour, the whole sordid story came pouring out, the dismissiveness, the affair with Giselle, the final cruel words about the baby. Mrs. Peterson listened without judgment, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a quiet, simmering anger on Cress's behalf. "That man," she said, finally, her voice firm, "is a fool of the highest order. To throw away a diamond because he's too busy admiring cheap glass." That night, Cress slept in the small attic room she had rented as a student, the scent of lavender and old books a comforting lullaby. The mattress was lumpy. The sheets were faded cotton, not Egyptian, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. The next few weeks were a brutal adjustment. The first thing she did was take the taxi to a consignment shop and sell the emerald gown and the diamond earrings she was wearing. The money was a pittance compared to their worth, but it was hers. It was enough for a few weeks' rent to Mrs. Peterson, who initially refused, but relented when Cress insisted a simple wardrobe of second-hand clothes and groceries. The whiplash of her new reality was staggering. One day she was attending fittings for custom maternity wear. The next she was counting change to see if she could afford organic milk. The nausea of her first trimester returned with a vengeance amplified by stress and a diet that no longer included chef-prepared, nutrient-balanced meals. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. Some days the weight of her grief and fear was so heavy she could barely get out of bed. She would lie there, one hand on her growing belly, and weep for the future she had lost, and for the child who would be born into this chaos. Lucius made no attempt to contact her. The credit card was cancelled within hours, as she'd predicted. A week later, a curt email from his lawyer arrived informing her that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that given the circumstances of her desertion, she should not expect a generous settlement. There was no mention of the baby. It was as if she and their child had been surgically excised from his life. The cold corporate cruelty of it all reignited a spark of anger within her. It was a small spark, but in the darkness of her despair, it was enough to see by. Mrs. Peterson was her rock. She would leave trays of toast and soup outside Cress's door, never pushing, but always present. She'd coax her out for walks in the local park, encouraging her to feel the sun on her face. "One foot in front of the other, dear," she'd say. "That's all anyone can do." Slowly, painfully, Cress began to piece herself back together. The storm was still raging, but she was no longer adrift. She was learning to build a raft. She started sketching again, not for a business, but for herself. She drew the faces she saw in the park, the intricate patterns of leaves on the sidewalk, the way the light hit the brick buildings at sunset. It was a way to reclaim a part of herself that Lucius had tried to extinguish. She was no longer Cressida Montclair, the millionaire's wife. She was Cress Bishop, a designer, a survivor, and a mother-to-be. And in the quiet anonymity of her new life that felt like a promotion, months bled into one another. The city transitioned from the crispness of late autumn to the deep freeze of winter. Cress's belly grew round and full, a constant living reminder of the new life she was now solely responsible for. The sharp, acute pain of Lucius's betrayal had dulled into a persistent heavy ache, but her focus had shifted. Her survival and the well-being of her baby became her entire world. She found a quiet rhythm in her life with Mrs. Peterson. She helped with chores around the house. Her sketches began to fill a new portfolio, and she even took on some small freelance jobs designing logos and brochures for local businesses. The pay was meager, but the sense of accomplishment was immeasurable. Each dollar she earned was a brick in the foundation of her new independent life. One particularly cold and snowy afternoon, with the city hushed under a blanket of white, Mrs. Peterson asked for her help clearing out some old boxes from a storage closet. "My old bones aren't what they used to be," she said with a smile. Amongst the dusty relics of a life well lived, Cress found a small wooden trunk tucked away in a corner. It was hers. Her mother had sent it to Mrs. Peterson for safekeeping when Cress had first moved in with Lucius, filled with childhood mementos and things that didn't fit into the sterile minimalism of the penthouse. She had completely forgotten about it. Curious, she pried open the lid. Inside were photo albums, her old art school projects, and a collection of her grandfather's things. Robert Bishop had been a master tailor, a quiet, meticulous man who had passed away when Cress was in her late teens. He had been her first mentor, the one who taught her about the feel of different fabrics, the importance of a perfect stitch, the soul that could be woven into a garment. She lifted out his old sewing kit, the heavy shears he used to cut cloth, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was not jewelry, but a single ornate old-fashioned brass key and a thick sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. Her name, Cressida, was written on the front in her grandfather's elegant looping script. Her heart pounded as she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was dated a week before he passed away. "My dearest Cressida, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope that you have found happiness in your life. I am writing to you about a part of my past I rarely spoke of. Long before I was a simple neighborhood tailor, I was a partner in a business. I was the craftsman, the artist. My partner was the salesman, the visionary. Together we founded a small but exceptional textile company called Ariadne Weavers. We created fabrics of unparalleled quality. Over time, my partner, a man named Jonathan Montclair, wanted to expand into fashion, into a world of glamour and branding that held little appeal for me. We had different visions. I wanted to create art. He wanted to build an empire. We parted ways amicably. I sold him my operational shares, but I kept my founding stake, a silent, controlling interest in the parent company we had established. I had no interest in boardrooms or stock markets, but I wanted to ensure the legacy of our quality was protected. I put these shares into a blind trust for you, my only grandchild. The company evolved, and Ariadne Weavers became the foundation of what you now likely know as Montclair Couture. Jonathan's son, and perhaps his grandson, may have forgotten that the roots of their grand empire lie in the hands of a quiet tailor. This key will open a safe deposit box at the Sterling National Bank downtown. Inside you will find the trust documents. They are structured to give you full control upon your 30th birthday, or under a force majeure clause, which can be enacted in the event of significant personal distress or upheaval. My lawyer, a brilliant man named David Chen, holds the second key and the full instructions. His card is enclosed. This is your legacy, Cressida. Not a weapon, but a shield. It is the fruit of my life's work. Use it to protect yourself, to build something beautiful and true, and to ensure that true craftsmanship is never sacrificed for the sake of empty glamour. Be happy, my dear girl. With all my love. Grandfather Robert Cress read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking so violently the parchment rattled. Montclair Couture, Lucius's company. Her grandfather was the silent founder. It seemed impossible, a fantasy. She stared at the heavy brass key in her palm. It felt impossibly real. A shield, he had called it. Right now, she needed a shield more than anything. The next morning, driven by a dizzying mix of hope and disbelief, she called the number on the enclosed business card. A calm, professional voice answered. "Law offices of Chen and Associates. My name is Cressida Bishop," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. "I was told to contact a Mr. David Chen. It's regarding my grandfather, Robert Bishop." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Chen has been expecting your call for a very long time," the voice replied. "Can you come in this afternoon?" The law office was in a sleek, modern building, a world away from Mrs. Peterson's cozy brownstone. But Cress walked in not as a supplicant, but as a woman on a mission. David Chen was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. He greeted her not with pity, but with a deep professional respect. He already had his key. Together they went to the bank. The safe deposit box was opened, and inside, nestled in a leather-bound folio, were the documents. As Mr. Chen explained the complex legal language, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her grandfather hadn't just left her some stock. He had left her a 52% controlling interest in the holding company that owned Montclair Couture and all its assets. It was an ironclad, unassailable majority stake. Because Lucius's father had diluted his own shares over the years to fund acquisitions and pay off debts, Lucius's own portion, which he believed gave him ultimate control, was only around 35%. He was a king ruling a kingdom he didn't actually own. Your grandfather's force majeure clause is quite clear. Mr. Chen explained, his voice calm and steady, as he looked at the heavily pregnant, determined woman before him. Your current circumstances, divorce, financial abandonment, more than satisfy the conditions. The trust is now yours to command. The question is, Ms. Bishop, what do you want to do with it? Cress looked down at the documents at her grandfather's name, entwined with the Montclairs. She thought of Lucius's sneering face, of Giselle's cruel nickname for her, of the way her dreams had been casually crushed. But more than that, she thought of her grandfather's words, "Build something beautiful and true." A slow, determined smile spread across her face. The storm hadn't broken her. It had washed away the debris and revealed the foundation that had been there all along. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I want to call a meeting, an extraordinary general meeting of the shareholders, and I want to introduce them to their new majority owner." The discovery of her inheritance didn't trigger an immediate, vengeful charge. Instead, it ignited a slow, deliberate fire within Cress. The months of helplessness and fear were burned away, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. She was no longer a victim adrift in a storm. She was the storm itself, gathering strength, waiting for the perfect moment to make landfall. David Chen became her general, her strategist. They met not in his gleaming corporate office, but in the quiet, sunlit parlor of Mrs. Peterson's brownstone, a war room hidden in plain sight. Over cups of tea and plates of biscuits, they pored over decades of company financials, board meeting minutes, and shareholder reports. Cress wasn't just claiming an inheritance. She was earning it. She devoured every document, learning the intricate dance of corporate governance, finance, and law. She discovered the company's weaknesses, its strengths, and most importantly, the rot that had set in under Lucius's leadership. While Montclair Couture's public image was stronger than ever, thanks to Giselle's flashy, critically acclaimed but astronomically expensive new collection, the company's finances told a different story. Lucius was leveraging assets to fund lavish marketing campaigns and his own exorbitant lifestyle. He had fired dozens of long-serving loyal employees, master tailors, pattern makers, and textile experts who had been with the company for decades, some since her grandfather's era, replacing them with cheaper, less experienced labor to cut costs. He was sacrificing the very soul of the company, its commitment to quality craftsmanship, for short-term buzz and profit. He was turning her grandfather's legacy into a hollow, gilded shell. "He's arrogant," David Chen observed one afternoon, tapping a finger on a damning quarterly report. "He believes he's untouchable. That's our greatest advantage. He won't see us coming." Their plan, which Cress privately named the Phoenix Agenda, was twofold. First, they needed to consolidate her power silently. While her 52% stake gave her control, David advised acquiring a few more percentage points on the open market through a proxy buyer. This would not only fortify her position, but also create a small stir, a tremor that might put Lucius on edge, but wouldn't reveal the true source of the earthquake to come. "We make him look for a threat from a rival corporation or a hedge fund," David explained. "He'll be looking in the wrong direction, scanning the horizon for battleships, while our submarine glides right underneath him." Second, Cress needed to be ready. It wasn't enough to be the owner. She had to be the leader. She spent her days studying and her nights sketching. But now her designs weren't for a quaint baby line. They were for a new Montclair couture, a collection that honored her grandfather's commitment to fabric and form, but was infused with a bold, modern vision. It was a vision of strength, resilience, and quiet power. Everything she herself was becoming. As her due date approached, her resolve only hardened. The kicks and flutters in her womb were a constant reminder of what she was fighting for, not just for herself, but for her child's future, a future free from the shadow of a man like Lucius Montclair. Meanwhile, Lucius remained blissfully, arrogantly unaware. Cress's quiet disappearance from his life was to him a problem solved. He was seen at every party, every opening, with the triumphant Giselle Dubois on his arm. The press hailed them as the new power couple of fashion. In a widely circulated interview, Lucius was asked about his recent divorce. "Sometimes people grow in different directions," he'd said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "My focus has always been, and will always be, on the future of this company. I require a partner who shares that vision, not one who is distracted by domestic trivialities." The words relayed to Cress by David were like fuel on the fire. Domestic trivialities. He was talking about their child. A week before the annual shareholders' meeting, Cress gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her daughter in her arms in the quiet hospital room, looking into her tiny, perfect face, Cress knew every fear, every tear, every moment of struggle had been worth it. This was not just about taking back a company. It was about reclaiming her life and building a legacy of strength for her daughter. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived a cool, crisp morning 6 weeks after Grace was born. Lucius was expecting a routine victory lap. The press was already lauding his incredible turnaround of the brand. He had prepared a triumphant speech about record-breaking sales from Giselle's latest collection and his bold vision for the future. Cress, however, was preparing for battle. She left Grace in the loving care of Mrs. Peterson. She didn't dress in a flashy, attention-grabbing gown. Instead, she chose a custom-tailored suit of her own design, made from a deep charcoal grey wool that her grandfather would have admired. It was elegant, powerful, and understated. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional chignon, and her face, though tired from sleepless nights with a newborn, was set with a resolve of forged steel. As David Chen held the door of the car for her, outside the corporate tower that bore the Montclair name, he gave her a final reassuring nod. "Ready, Ms. Bishop?" She took a deep breath, the city air cool and clean. She thought of her grandfather's letter of her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was no longer the broken, weeping woman who had fled into the night. She was a phoenix, risen from the ashes, and she was about to claim her sky. "I'm ready," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity and power that was entirely her own. The Montclair Couture boardroom was on the 50th floor, a glass-walled sanctuary of power overlooking the sprawling city. It was designed to intimidate with a long, imposing table of polished black granite and chairs that resembled minimalist thrones. The shareholders and board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in expensive suits, were already assembled. At the head of the table sat Lucius Montclair, radiating an aura of absolute command. He was tanned, smiling the very picture of a man at the apex of his success. Beside him, in a seat of honor, usually reserved for the COO, was Giselle Dubois, looking smug and victorious in a shockingly red dress. She was not a board member, but her presence was a clear statement of her power and influence within Lucius's new world order. "As you can see from the preliminary reports," Lucius began, his voice smooth and confident, "Giselle's Metamorphosis collection has not only garnered universal acclaim, but has also driven sales up by 200% this quarter. Our stock price is at an all-time high. The future of Montclair Couture has never been brighter." He launched into a self-congratulatory speech filled with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and brand actualization. He painted a picture of a future built on his singular, brilliant vision. The board members nodded along, their expressions ranging from impressed to sycophantic. It was at that moment, just as Lucius was pausing for dramatic effect, that the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman they didn't recognize. She was flanked by the formidable David Chen, whose reputation as one of the city's sharpest corporate lawyers preceded him. The woman was poised, her expression unreadable, her tailored grey suit a stark contrast to Giselle's flamboyant red. She radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Lucius frowned, irritated by the interruption. "I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Security." But before anyone could move, David Chen stepped forward, placing a slim leather portfolio on the granite table. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Montclair. We are precisely where we are supposed to be." Cress stepped into the room, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the marble floor. Her eyes swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Giselle's confused sneer, before finally landing on Lucius. Lucius stared at her. Recognition dawned, slowly contorting his features into a mask of pure disbelief. This was Cressida, but it wasn't. The timid, accommodating woman he had discarded was gone. This woman was a stranger, powerful, confident, and looking at him not with heartbreak, but with an unnervingly calm detachment, like a scientist observing a specimen. "Cressida," he finally stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady, filling the suddenly silent room, "is Ms. Bishop, and I am here to attend my first shareholders' meeting." A confused murmur rippled through the room. "Shareholder," one of the board members scoffed. "With all due respect, The shares held by employees and minor investors don't grant access to this meeting. David Chen opened his portfolio. Ms. Bishop is not a minor investor, he stated calmly, sliding official notarized documents across the table towards the board's chairman. She is the sole beneficiary of the Robert Bishop Blind Trust. As of 2 months ago, she has taken active control of that trust. The chairman, a portly man named George Finney, picked up the documents, his eyes widening as he read. The Bishop Trust, but that's been dormant for decades. It's a founding stake. His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. He looked up, his face pale. To be precise, David Chen continued, the trust holds 52% of the voting shares of the parent company, Montclair Holdings International. My client, Ms. Cressida Bishop, is the new majority owner. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of pure shock. You could have heard a pin drop. Giselle's smug expression had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed horror. The board members stared first at the documents, then at Cress, their minds scrambling to process the impossible truth. Lucius's face had drained of all color. He looked as if he'd been physically struck. That's impossible, he breathed, shaking his head. It's a lie. My father, your father knew. Cress said, her voice cutting through his denial like a shard of glass. He knew that the foundation of this entire empire belonged to my grandfather, the man whose artistry he built his brand upon, and then conveniently forgot. You, however, seem to have been kept in the dark. She walked slowly around the table until she stood directly opposite him. You spoke of your vision for the future, she said, her gaze unwavering. But your vision is one of debt disposability and disrespect for the legacy that made this company great. You fired craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to this house to fund her overpriced, overhyped collections. She gave a curt nod towards a horrified Giselle. You leveraged the company's assets to fund your own ego. You have mistaken flash for substance and buzz for value. She placed her hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder. This board is adjourned. A new meeting will be called tomorrow to elect a new board of directors. Mr. Montclair, your position as CEO and chairman is terminated. You have 1 hour to clear your personal belongings from your office. Security will escort you out. Lucius just stared at her, speechless, his empire crumbling around him in the space of 5 minutes. You can't do this, he finally whispered, his voice cracking with desperation and rage. Cress leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, intense pitch for his ears alone. You once told me to focus on my little hobby. You were right. I found one. It's called owning your entire world. You said a son would be good for the brand's legacy. You were wrong. A daughter is. With that, she straightened up and addressed the stunned room. My name is Cressida Bishop, and I am the future of this company. The silence in the boardroom stretched for a full 10 seconds, a vacuum of pure shock that sucked all the air from the room. Then it fractured. Lucius Montclair, who had stood frozen as if turned to stone, finally came back to life, but as a grotesque parody of his former self. The charismatic control vanished, replaced by a raw, sputtering rage. Fraud, he roared, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the black granite table, a gesture that lacked its intended power and only betrayed his desperation. This is a fabrication, a pathetic, vengeful fantasy. My lawyers will bury you. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Cress didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a pillar of calm in his storm. On the contrary, Lucius, she replied, her voice level and cold. "You are the one who has no idea. You never did. You saw a quiet wife, not a founder's heir. You saw a hobby, not a legacy. Your blindness is not my problem." Her composure seemed to enrage him further. He turned his pleading, wild eyes to the board members, the men and women who had idolized him just minutes before. "Finney, tell her this is absurd. We are Montclair Couture. George Finney." The chairman meticulously avoided Lucius's gaze. His attention suddenly glued to the documents in his hands, as if they were the most fascinating text he had ever read. The other board members followed suit, shuffling papers, checking their phones, doing anything to avoid being caught in the blast radius of their fallen leader. They were sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water. Their allegiance had already shifted their minds furiously, calculating how to best position themselves in this new regime. Seeing no help there, Lucius's fury collapsed into a pathetic, desperate plea. "Cressida, Cress, please," he whispered, the change in tone jarring. "We can talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work something out, a settlement." It was the sight of Giselle that cut him short. Her face, a mask of horror, was twisted with a fury that mirrored his own. But her anger was aimed at him, the man whose power had been her shield and her platform. With a strangled cry of disgust, she shot Cress a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, grabbed her ludicrously expensive handbag, and fled. Her stiletto heels clicked a frantic, panicked rhythm on the marble floor, the sound of an era of cheap spectacle running for its life. Her exit seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Lucius deflated the fight, draining out of him, leaving a slumped, hollowed-out man. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time he looked his age. The two security guards who entered the room were almost a mercy, their impassive presence putting an end to the humiliating spectacle. They flanked him, their quiet professionalism a stark contrast to his emotional disintegration. As they led him toward the door, he finally looked at Cress one last time, his eyes searching for something. Pity, regret, a flicker of the woman he once knew. He found nothing but the cool, steady gaze of a stranger who now owned his entire world. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with a profound finality. The reign of Lucius Montclair was over. The boardroom was still thick with tension. Cress allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, letting the new reality cement itself in the minds of everyone present. Then she turned to the pale-faced chairman. "Mr. Finney," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Please schedule the extraordinary meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow. My office will forward you the agenda and the list of my proposed new board members. You are all welcome to tender your resignations beforehand if you feel you cannot align with the new direction of this company." It was a clear, professional dismissal. David Chen gave a slight, satisfied nod, gathering his papers. As the shaken board members filed out, avoiding her eyes, he placed a steadying hand on her arm. "You were magnificent, Ms. Bishop." Cress let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep sense of exhaustion and a startlingly clear sense of purpose. "This was just the first step, David," she said. "The real work starts now." Her first day as chairwoman of Montclair Holdings was a blur of calculated action, but she didn't begin in the executive suite. She bypassed the elevators and took the service stairs down to the workshops, the true heart of the company. When she entered, a hush fell over the room. The remaining artisans, the cutters, seamstresses, and textile experts looked up from their work. their faces etched with the anxious uncertainty of people who had grown used to the axe falling without warning. She gathered them together, standing not on a platform, but among them on the worn wooden floor. "My name is Cressida Bishop," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and sincerity. "Some of you may have known my grandfather, Robert Bishop." A few of the older workers exchanged surprised glances. An elderly tailor at the back, a man with hands gnarled from 60 years of holding a needle, let out a soft gasp. He remembered. "My grandfather believed that a garment's soul is in its fabric and its stitch." Cress continued, her gaze sweeping over their faces. "He believed in substance, in quality, in the irreplaceable value of a master's hand. This company was built on that belief, and under my leadership we are returning to it." She then announced her first executive order, the immediate reinstatement of every single craftsman Lucius had fired, with full back pay and a formal apology from the company. A wave of stunned disbelief was followed by a ripple of applause that grew into a heartfelt ovation. The old tailor, his eyes glistening with tears, stepped forward. "Robert Bishop," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was the finest man I ever knew. He would be so proud of you today, miss." In that moment, Cress wasn't just a CEO. She was a promise fulfilled, a legacy restored. Over the next few weeks, the transformation of Montclair Couture was seismic. Cress's Phoenix agenda was not just about a hostile takeover. It was a complete cultural and creative resurrection. The new motto she installed, etched onto the lobby wall, where a giant portrait of Lucius used to hang, was substance over spectacle. She walked through the design studio, which felt sterile and soulless under Giselle's tenure. Tucked away in a corner, she found Helen, a veteran pattern maker in her late 60s, who was quietly packing her things, assuming she would be next to go. Cress approached her and asked to see her personal sketchbook. Hesitantly, Helen revealed pages filled with designs of breathtaking elegance and structural genius ideas Lucius and Giselle had dismissed as too classic. "Helen," Cress said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not accepting your resignation. I'm offering you the position of head designer." The woman stared at her, speechless, as Cress explained her new vision, a company led by the talent that had been its bedrock all along. The most symbolic change was the C-suite itself. Lucius's office had been a monument to his ego, all black marble chrome and oversized modern art with a desk the size of a small car. Cress had it all stripped out. The dark walls were painted a warm, inviting white. Sunlight, once blocked by imposing blinds, was allowed to flood the space. In place of the massive desk, she brought in a large communal work table covered in fabric swatches and sketchbooks, and in the sunniest corner, she placed a beautiful handcrafted bassinet. Her daughter Grace would often sleep there as Cress worked, a living, breathing symbol of the company's new life, a future that was female, nurturing, and creative at its core. One evening, months after the takeover, Cress stood at the vast window of that transformed office, holding a sleeping Grace in her arms. The city lights glittered below, no longer mocking her, but spread out before her like a kingdom of her own making. She thought of the woman she had been, the heartbroken wife, fleeing a party in a borrowed gown, the terrified mother-to-be huddled in Mrs. Peterson's attic room. She thought of the weight of her grandfather's key in her palm, the key that had unlocked not just a fortune, but the strength that had been inside her all along. The world was calling her story a tale of revenge. But as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she knew it was something more profound. Revenge was a fire that consumed itself, leaving only ash. What she had done was an act of restoration. She had saved a legacy from ruin and built a future for her child. She was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was the architect of her own destiny, a creator, a leader, and a mother. She had walked out of her old life broken, but in doing so had discovered the parts of herself that were truly unbreakable. Her reign, the reign of a bishop, had only just begun. And there you have it, the incredible story of Cressida Bishop, a story that proves that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest souls. She went from a broken, pregnant wife with nothing to her name to the powerful leader of a fashion empire, not through revenge, but through resilience, intelligence, and by reclaiming a legacy she never knew she had. Her journey reminds us that our true strength often lies dormant, hidden in our history, and in our character, just waiting for a crisis to awaken it. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes losing everything is the only way to truly find yourself and build something even more magnificent in its place. What did you think of Cress's ultimate power move? Was Lucius's downfall everything you hoped it would be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and poetic justice, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of triumph, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable, real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.